Greetings, adventurers. You're listening to The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. Don't worry, it's a safe space. I'll handle all the danger for you. I designed these stories to help you relax, chill anxiety, and go to sleep. Maybe they'll even put a smile on your face, even if it's a sleepy smile. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Good evening, adventurers. I hope you're doing well. I also hope you're all cozy and settled in because tonight I'm going to tell you about an unexpected stop we had to make on our way home to Earth. Our NASA mission specialist Janet had received a distress call on a secure channel, and we needed to help out the scientists and astronauts at the International Space Station. So naturally we agreed and set a course immediately for the ISS. This would delay us getting home a bit, especially when we were so close, but the entire crew understood and were eager to help fellow space travelers in need. It was like that time I was sailing down the Nile River in Eastern Africa. What's unusual is how crowded the river is, as there's always a plethora of private detectives trying to solve mysteries up and down it the entire time. Anyway, one of the more famous private investigators needed my assistance in solving a particularly vexing mystery involving a hidden pyramid, an inheritance, and an ancient curse. I was happy to help, of course, and after an encounter with an angry 16-foot-long Nile crocodile, I thought we were in the clear. But no. After entering the hidden pyramid, we were set upon by no less than 3 mummies who all seemed to be working together, which was unusual for mummies. After a chase and a makeshift mummy trap, we were able to sort things out. In the end, the Duchess was able to reclaim her inheritance from a greedy family of Romanian grifters who also like to dress up as mummies. I mean, 3 mummies working together was my first clue something was off. And the famous detective also noticed that one of the mummies was carrying a cell phone, which was the other tip-off. Anyway, it was time well spent, and I then continued on my journey to find a tribe of ancient pandas, which of course were not native to the region. So that was a mystery unto itself, but one the famous detective was not interested in. So we parted ways until next time, and I wished him Godspeed on solving his elaborate mysteries. So it was an unexpected stop, but well worth it. I was able to help a duchess, and now I have the longest crocodile tooth you've ever seen hanging on my wall in my adventure lounge. So, I will tell you all about our unexpected stop at the International Space Station in a moment. But right now, I'd like to mention something about our stories, especially for the new listeners. You Professor Atwood OGs, that's what Bradley says, already know the score. Anyway, the stories are designed for you to drift in and out of, and while yes, I do like to tell you a full story every episode, drifting in and out or falling completely asleep is factored into the equation. You can pick things up anywhere, and that's why I do the story recaps at the beginning, and you can go back and listen to previous adventures anytime you wish. So by all means, enjoy the show any way you wish. It's designed that way. No rules and no pressure, adventurers. I'd also like to nudge you to rate the show with a bunch of stars. Reviews are great too. It's always nice to read pleasant things about what we're doing over here. And, this is also important, don't forget to tell your friends directly about the show and post about it wherever you post about things. The more adventurers, the merrier. Now, before I mention the White Cat Adventurers Club, I want to remind you that we've created a Science and Adventure Helper donation link on the homepage. So just go to whitecatentertainment.com and click donate for a one-time donation. Then you can do it whenever you like for whatever you like. But if you do want a little more, there's the White Cat Adventurers Club. You get early access sometimes and ad-free listening to all the shows and an exclusive look at my very irregular journal. Science and exploring is expensive, and your support helps make it happen. And for just $5 a month, you can show your support for the show. There are also different tiers with different rewards, including an exclusive t-shirt. Please go to patreon.com/whitecatentertainment and enjoy the access your way. All right, let's get back to the story. As you remember, we were on our way back to Earth and we're almost there when Janet, our NASA mission specialist, received a distress call on a secure private channel. The International Space Station was having an issue, and she wasn't quite sure what it was, only that it was urgent. She thought she heard the words water bear and moss piglet, which didn't make sense, of course. Or did it? I had a sneaking suspicion I had heard those words before, but I couldn't quite place them. I needed more information, as we all did. However, the one thing that was not in question was that the current ISS residents needed our help. We would need to get to them as soon as we could and offer any assistance if we were able. After briefing the crew, Flight Commander Barry coordinated with Janet about docking procedures for the ISS. One of the docking hatches was damaged, so we'd have to use the one on the far side of the station. This had me a bit concerned, as there wasn't really anything that could damage a docking hatch aside from another ship or a meteor swarm, or perhaps something from the inside, but it would take something rather large and bulky, so it was unlikely. Or so I thought. We approached the ISS, and Mission Specialist Janet was able to reestablish communications as we approached. Flight Commander Barry began our docking procedures with style and grace. Docking with the ISS was a little challenging due to our rotating hull, but Barry was an experienced pilot and made adjustments on the fly. We were soon ready to enter the ISS. I would keep the initial party small until we knew what we were dealing with. Our mercenary/security officer Dolores, of course, insisted on coming, and Mission Specialist Janet, and I thought bringing Aaron, our medic, may be a good idea as well. I instructed the rest of the crew, including my assistant Bradley, to stay behind and monitor things on our ship, the Journeyman. Soon hatches were opening and airlocks were engaging. There was a decompression and a decontamination procedure, and then the airlock slid open and two imposing figures met us. Well, at least I thought they probably were usually imposing, but these gentlemen looked worn out, exhausted, and a little worried. They introduced themselves as Professor Andrews, in charge of the so-called other research, and the ISS station commander, Captain Jack. Now, as I had mentioned before, the ISS serves as a microgravity and space environment research laboratory in which scientific research is conducted in astrobiology, astronomy, meteorology, physics, and so-called other fields. The ISS is also suited for testing the spacecraft systems and equipment required for future long-duration missions to the Moon and Mars. Now, while all these things are constantly being researched and developed, I was now sure that whatever the issue was, it was indeed under the umbrella of Professor Andrews's other research. Captain Jack welcomed us all to the ISS and added that they don't get many visitors, so the hospitality they could offer was limited. I said we understood and that we were here to offer assistance, not be comfortable guests. Although I admit I do like being a comfortable guest, but now was not the time. Janet asked what the trouble was and mentioned that she heard the words water bear and moss piglet over communications and that she must have heard incorrectly. Professor Andrews said that was not a mistake. She had indeed heard correctly. That's when it all started coming back to me. But how could an almost microscopic organism cause such havoc? Well, that had yet to be revealed. I said to Professor Andrews, "You're talking about tardigrades, aren't you?" He nodded. I knew they had been on the ISS for years, and they had been experimenting on them, but I certainly never heard about them being a problem before. I mean, it made sense they would have the tardigrades up here and involved in experiments. The truth about interstellar travel is that it's, well, quite difficult to survive in outer space. It's almost as if space doesn't want anything living in it and desperately makes it as difficult as possible to live here. Space is hostile to any type of life, and it takes a rather large bit of money and science to make it possible via rocket ships and space stations. But, believe it or not, there is actually one organism that can survive in space. Well, I should clarify, one organism from Earth. At least we think it's from Earth. Anyway, tardigrades, known colloquially as water bears or moss piglets, are a phylum of eight-legged segmented microanimals. They were first described by the German zoologist Johann August Ephraim Goes in 1773, who called them little water bears. In 1777, the Italian biologist Lazzaro Spallanzani named them Tardigrade, which means slow steppers. It's a bit of an odd thing to focus on, but, okay, so be it. Tardigrades have been found in diverse regions of Earth's biosphere: mountaintops, the deep sea, tropical rainforests, and yes, even the Antarctic. Tardigrades are among the most resilient animals known, with individual species able to survive extreme conditions, such as exposure to extreme temperatures, extreme pressures, both high and low, air deprivation, radiation, dehydration, and starvation that would quickly kill most other known forms of life. Tardigrades have even survived exposure to outer space. So it made sense that the ISS, of course, would be doing experiments with tardigrades up here. So what went wrong? I suppose I would hear about that soon enough. There are about 1,300 known species in the phylum Tardigrade, a part of the superphylum Ecdysozoa, consisting of animals that grow by ecdysis, such as arthropods and nematodes. The earliest known true members of the group are known from Cretaceous amber from about 66 million years ago that were found in North America, but are essentially modern forms. Their origin is therefore likely much earlier, as they diverged from their closest relatives in the Cambrian over 500 million years ago. Tardigrades are usually about a half millimeter long when fully grown. Now, you'd think you'd be able to see one with the naked eye, and in the right light, perhaps. But it would pretty much just look like a speck of dust or debris without at least a low-level microscope. They are short and plump, with 4 pairs of legs, each ending in claws, usually 4 to 8, or sometimes suction discs. Tardigrades are prevalent in mosses and lichens and feed on plant cells, algae, and small invertebrates. When collected, they may be viewed under a low-power microscope, making them accessible to students and amateur scientists. In fact, when I lecture or guest teach a science class for teenagers or amateur scientists, tardigrades are always a big hit. I mean, you don't mess with the science petri dish classics like hydras, planaria, or tardigrades. Tardigrades are often found on lichens and mosses, for example, by soaking a piece of moss in water. Other environments in which they are found include dunes and coasts, generally, in soil, leaf litter, and marine or freshwater sediments, where they may actually occur quite frequently, up to 95,000 animals per gallon. One tardigrade species can be found on barnacles. Oh, a seafaring tardigrade. Interesting. You have to admire their tiny spirit of adventure, that's for sure. Now, this is where things get interesting and was most likely the focus of Professor Andrews' research. Tardigrades are the first known animals to survive after exposure to outer space. You see, in September 2007, dehydrated tardigrades were taken into low Earth orbit on the Photon M3 mission carrying the Biopan astrobiology payload. For 10 days, groups of tardigrades, some of them previously dehydrated, some of them not, were exposed to the hard vacuum of outer space, or vacuum and solar UV radiation. Now, back on Earth, more than 68% of the subjects protected from solar UV radiation were reanimated within 30 minutes following rehydration. Although subsequent mortality was high, many of these produced viable embryos. In contrast, hydrated samples exposed to the combined effect of vacuum and full solar UV radiation had significantly reduced survival, with only 3 subjects surviving. Although it was found that the space vacuum did not have a significant effect on egg laying. I'm not quite sure how that was measured, but I trust the results. In May 2011, Italian scientists sent tardigrades on board the International Space Station along with extremophiles on STS-134, the final flight of Space Shuttle Endeavour. Their conclusion was that microgravity and cosmic radiation did not significantly affect survival of tardigrades in flight, and stated that tardigrades represent a useful animal for space research. So I knew the tardigrades were up here, and it looks like they've been here since 2011. So I wondered again, what was causing the problem now? Anyway, in November 2011, they were among the organisms to be sent by the US-based Planetary Society on the Russian Phobos Grunt mission's Living Interplanetary Flight Experiment to Phobos. However, the launch failed, unfortunately. In August 2019, scientists reported that a capsule containing tardigrades in a cryptobiotic state may have survived for a while on the Moon after the April 2019 crash landing of Bereshit, a failed Israeli lunar lander. But in May 2011, it was reported they were unlikely to have survived the impact. I imagine them crossing over a tiny rainbow bridge just for explorer animals. In recent years, there's also been increased speculation regarding tardigrades' ability to survive on Mars without any life support systems. But they would still, of course, need stuff to eat to survive, of course. So they would have to find Matt Damon's potato farm. I'm kidding, of course. I love that movie, The Martian. But now, if they did find their way to the Martian inner city, they'd be just fine. Anyway, I asked what problem tiny tardigrades could possibly cause, and that's when Captain Jack and Professor Andrews looked at me with a worn-out and nervous expression. Professor Andrews said the problem was that they, weren't so tiny anymore. I asked if you could see them clearly with the naked eye, and Professor Andrews responded, "Oh, definitely." Captain Jack said it would be easier just to show us at this point, so we followed him and Professor Andrews down the ISS main corridor. We walked and didn't float, even though I, and most likely NASA mission specialist Janet, get this question a lot. Is there gravity on the International Space Station? The answer is, sort of. The correct term is microgravity. It happens whenever an object is in free fall. The ISS orbits the Earth at a distance of 40 kilometers and travels at a speed of 28,000 kilometers per hour. The astronauts are traveling at the same speed as the ISS. Both the astronauts and the ISS are in orbit around, or about, the Earth, which also means they are in a continual state of free fall towards the Earth. So the gravity, relatively speaking to the astronauts and scientists, is about 89% that of Earth's. However, recent upgrades to the station, including orbital force dampeners, have gotten that number up to about 98%. So now it just kind of feels really close to normal Earth gravity. As we walked through the hall, we met the chief station engineer, Vladimir, who was cradling his left arm. Captain Jack said he was really good at setting up new equipment, so the rest of the crew had nicknamed him Vlad the Installer. I was glad to see everyone was keeping up with their sense of humor, that's for sure. Aaron wanted to take a look at Vlad's arm in the medical bay and asked where their medic was. Professor Andrews said she was injured and in the med bay herself, but that's where we were headed next. The ISS med bay was much smaller than the Journeyman's, and we were introduced to Sally, the medic, who was resting comfortably after what looked like a back injury. Aaron asked for permission to move both Sally and Vlad to the Journeyman so he could check them both out properly, and Captain Jack agreed. So Aaron, Vlad, and Sally all went over to the Journeyman, and I informed Flight Commander Barry he would be having 2 visitors. After they had departed, we were about to continue following Captain Jack and Professor Andrews when we began to hear some distant banging and creaking. I asked if that was the rest of the crew, and Captain Jack replied no. They had evacuated the rest of the crew after the latest shuttle docking for safety. They were the only ones left on the station. Well, the only people, he added. Professor Andrews and Captain Jack looked around nervously, and before continuing, Professor Andrews thought it would be a good idea for us to learn exactly what kind of research he was doing up here. Janet and I agreed. Professor Andrews took a deep breath and continued. He said the International Space Station is a platform for scientific research that requires one or more of the unusual conditions present in low Earth orbit. For example, microgravity, cosmic radiation, and extreme temperatures. The primary fields of research include human research, that covers a lot of topics, space medicine, also a lot, life sciences, physical sciences, astronomy, and meteorology. The 2005 NASA Authorization Act designated the American segment of the International Space Station as a national laboratory with the goal of increasing the use of the ISS by other federal agencies and the private sector. Although you never know what you're going to get with the private sector. Everything from a casino on the moon to making a cat an astronaut has been proposed. Sometimes billionaires really don't know what to do with their money. Anyway, research on the ISS improves knowledge about the effects of long-term space exposure on the human body. Subjects currently under study include muscle atrophy, bone loss, and fluid shift. The data will be used to determine whether space colonization and lengthy human spaceflight are feasible. Well, we know it's feasible for sure, but we're not quite there yet, especially at scale. But then again, that was one of the reasons for the terraforming agreement with Mars. As of 2006, data on bone loss and muscular atrophy suggest that there would be a significant risk of fractures and movement problems if astronauts landed on a planet after a lengthy interplanetary cruise, even with the NASA propulsion upgrades. Large-scale medical studies are conducted aboard the ISS via the National Space Biomedical Research Institute, or NSBRI. Prominent among these is the Advanced Diagnostic Ultrasound and Microgravity Study, in which astronauts, including former ISS commanders Leroy Chow and Gennady Padalka, perform ultrasound scans under the guidance of remote experts. The study considers the diagnosis and treatment of medical conditions in space. Now, usually there is no physician on board the ISS, but sometimes there is, like in Sally's case. But if there isn't, the diagnosis of medical conditions is a challenge. It is anticipated that remotely guided ultrasound scans will have application on Earth in emergency and rural care situations where access to a trained physician is difficult. So, in the future, even surgeons may work remotely, but we'll see. I'm pretty sure bedside manner would suffer when a patient is looking at a screen and robot arms right before a surgery. Anyway, researchers are also investigating the effect of the station's near-weightless environment on the evolution, development, growth, and internal processes of plants and animals. In response to some of this data, NASA wants to investigate microgravity's effect on the growth of three-dimensional human-like tissues and the unusual protein crystals that can be formed in space. The investigation of the physics of fluids in microgravity will allow researchers to model the behavior of fluids better. Because fluids can be almost completely combined in microgravity, physicists investigate fluids that do not mix well on Earth. In addition, an examination of reactions that are slowed by low gravity and temperatures will give scientists a deeper understanding of superconductivity. The study of materials science is an important ISS research activity with the objective of reaping economic benefits through the improvement of techniques used on the ground. Other areas of interest include the effect of the low-gravity environment on combustion through the study of the efficiency of burning and control of emissions and pollutants. These findings may improve our knowledge about energy production and lead to economic and environmental benefits. Remote sensing of the Earth, astronomy, and deep space research on the ISS have dramatically increased during the 2010s after the completion of the U.S. orbital segment in 2011. Throughout the more than 20 years of the ISS program, researchers aboard the ISS and on the ground have examined aerosols, ozone, water vapor, and oxides in Earth's atmosphere, as well as the sun, cosmic rays, cosmic dust, antimatter, and dark matter in the universe. And that's just on the press release. There's many more things they've been studying as well. I mean, it's all quite impressive. But by then I was piecing it all together. The research was for health and longevity in space, especially so we could reach further distances. One of the keys to that research was the ability of the tardigrades to survive in harsh conditions, even in the vacuum of space. If there was a way to harness that ability for human space travel, humans could go farther than ever before. I asked if I was correct, and Professor Andrews confirmed that I was. And then he told me what went wrong. Actually, he admitted that he didn't really know. Something with the combination of microgravity, radiation, and one of the unusual protein crystals that could only be formed in space. I wondered if there was also another hidden catalyst to all this, but I kept my thoughts to myself for now. And I have to say, at that point, I wasn't even sure if I believed it. Larger than normal tardigrades? And even if they were a little bigger, they were harmless creatures, so how were they causing all this havoc? Suddenly the banging and the creaking became louder. Even though Captain Jack and Professor Andrews looked nervous, it was time to confront this problem head-on. I opened the hatch in front of me. Well, I tried to, but Dolores, our security officer/mercenary, stopped me and went first for my safety. The hatch opened, and we all looked into the corridor where the noise was coming from. Okay, I'll admit that even though hearing about what was going on here and why, I was not prepared for what I saw. There were 2 tardigrades in the ISS corridor, and yes, indeed, I could see them with my naked eye, mainly because they were the size of bears. And as you can imagine, the ISS isn't really equipped to handle bears, or really anything that's bear-sized. Captain Jack commented that they seemed to have gotten even larger, as they were the size of pigs earlier. Well, I said they were definitely living up to their names of moss piglet and water bear, that's for sure. Before I closed the hatch, I observed their behavior for a moment. It looked like they were searching for something, but I couldn't be sure. I mean, I'm not a tardigrade behavior specialist, but it turns out Professor Andrews was, and it looked like to him that they were indeed searching for something. But even after observation, he wasn't sure what. Now that the hatch was closed, Dolores suggested for everyone's safety that we regroup over at the Journeyman and plan out our next move. We all agreed. Unfortunately, that meant we had to abandon the ISS for now. Now, I'll admit I don't like to retreat and I don't like to lose. But when you're faced with a problem this size that seems to be growing and also headed straight for you, it's always best to take a moment and regroup to plan your next move. Courage and caution in equal measure. We headed back over to the Journeyman, secured the airlock, and I informed Flight Commander Barry that we'd have 2 more visitors. And I told Jillian to expect more guests for dinner. We had a lot of work to do, and we would be working well past dinner time. And I will tell you all about dealing with the large problem of tiny tardigrades next time. But before I end this evening's story, I want to talk to you about something: growth. It can have both positive and negative connotations, such as personal growth, which is beneficial to you, or weed growth in your garden, which is not so beneficial, especially to the surrounding flowers. And then there is neutral growth, like your fingernail, that nobody really cares about either way. Well, basically, we had to deal with the unexpected growth of large tardigrades who are wreaking havoc on the International Space Station. Granted, that was an unusual growth issue, and one I hope you'll never have to deal with. But my point is, growth in and of itself is not necessarily a negative thing. It's really what's growing and why that defines the positive or negative connotation. So when you discover positive growth, take a moment and appreciate it. You'll end up praising a child for getting bigger or congratulating an in-law on their unexpected enlightenment. If you encounter negative growth, like I always say, weed your garden in a timely manner and you'll nip it in the bud. And don't be afraid to grow yourself. Every journey brings wisdom, and you will most likely grow and not even realize it. Enjoy both the growth and the new knowledge. Good night, adventurers.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, including t-shirts, mugs, and blankets, go to whitecatentertainment.com.